was creating enough of a interest that we thought, let's jump on it right away and just hold another meeting this month and basically give the whole meeting over to Betty Ann and let her facilitate that, and any conversations that you have. Make good use of your chat if you need to, and anything else that we can do to just keep talking about discipleship. It's a major cornerstone of who we are as YWAM. So, and it's on people's minds. And of course, with all the stuff we've been going through, our whole life is a discipleship process right now, because we are going through things together. So it's a good place to learn. All right, so Betty Ann, I'm going to open in prayer and then turn it over to you. Father, we thank you that we can gather together in Jesus' name, even on Zoom, and we ask that your Spirit would roam among us and teach us. May you use Betty Ann today to speak and us to listen and us to participate and be open to learn and grow and change and be more and more in sync with what your Spirit is saying, sort of the ferment of the Spirit right now that's happening in our society. Teach us how to hear, teach us to be discerning, teach us to be open, in Jesus' name, amen. So Betty Ann is from Vancouver, and she's been leading the DTS there. She's right now in the midst of the Snowboarders DTS, and I'm going to go down there at the end of March, so I guess I get the last week in the school. That's always a great time. So Betty Ann, let's just give it to you, and we're delighted that you're here with us. And I must also recognize that Dan Hall is part of the DTS conversation across Canada. So he's here joining us from the East, and we're glad you're with us too, Dan. So just chime in whatever you need to. Go for it, Betty Ann.
Thank you. Ellen, did you have a question before? Oh, you have a little hand next to your... Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I'm on the DTS Centre with Dan. So I've asked Dan to be with us today and to be part of that conversation because it's our job to represent you guys to like the nation and the bigger YWAM Vancouver. So it's really, we're the connection. So we're supposed to report back to you. We're supposed to support you and help you and guide you, pray for you. We do lots of prayer for you and try to help you. So, and then we were informed, or Paul invited me last month, or was it just 2 weeks ago, to talk about discipleship to this group, because apparently it's a conversation that's been coming up. Is that the truth? I get some yes waving. So I'm a teacher and feed from feedback. So I feel a little lost when I don't hear or I just talk to myself. So I might ask a little for you guys to react to some stuff. I have been, so you guys hearing me okay? Some things good? Yes. Okay. All right. It's good to see your face. Graham was just with us last week. And we still talked about it yesterday, the impact that it had. Graham was teaching on nature and character of God. If you had the time, the honor, and the pleasure to invite him to come on your school, do so. Him and his wife are a good gift. So the first thing,
it was great.
First thing I wanted to talk to you guys before we start our conversations is this document. I just put it in the chat. I'm not sure if you just joined, like Stephanie Manelli, if you just joined. I'm not sure if you can see it in the chat. Can you see it, or I have to put it there again? So I just put a document there, and it's an older document. No, I'm gonna see if I can just put it back.
I think Graham needs to make you a co-host to do that.
To send it to everybody?
She did put it in the chat. It is there.
Yeah.
I saw it earlier.
Okay.
But I can make you a co-host anyway.
It's just the late arrivals that try to sneak in, and then everybody knows and it's recorded and everybody everywhere will know.
You are a blessing in our life.
Suck it on there, girl.
So this what this document is about is it's called the DTS is an apostolic discipleship community and training community. And when we were talking 2 weeks ago, I felt like to bring that back because we talk about DTS in one aspect, but this document was written by Maureen Menard, and it answers the question of what's the role of a DTS staff. So how many of you have seen this before? Yes, sweet. I like when it's the DTS long-term people. That makes my heart happy. So what this document says, it separates the two different roles. It talks about we're first a gathering of believers, and then we're also a group of people that makes a program happen. So what it does at the beginning, it talks about who we're not. So it does mention that as a DTS staff in general, we're not pastors, elders, or counselors, or who we're not. So it does mention who we're not, even though some of us are those things, but in a general sense of the DTS. But it talks that we're our first role is to be we're gathering as believers. So it does not matter if you're staff or student or whatever your role is, you're coming in coming at the table with the same level. We are all coming to this table as just being disciple, meaning we want to become like Jesus. And the idea is that we're helping each other to become like Jesus. So it doesn't matter how old you are, it doesn't matter your title. It's not about that. It's about us gathering to grow in Christ. So that's the first part. And that's where we have all those classic kind of one another passages where we need to honor one another. There's an expectation of our behavior. We need to spend time with Jesus. We need to grow in God. It doesn't matter if I've led 10 DTSs. When I'm in class, I should still expect to learn, should expect to grow. I should also be engaged, ask questions. It's about me becoming a disciple as much as my students are becoming a disciple. So that's the first aspect of it. And I think sometimes that cannot be pushed away. So yes, we have a program to run, a schedule to follow, lunch needs to be there, somebody needs to drive the speaker. Hopefully somebody's driving my speaker this morning, but somebody needs to do all those things so the program happens. But we cannot forget that our goal is also to become like Christ, and we're inviting people into that. Does that resonate? I just wanted to reinforce that only second we have a program, the second part of our role is to make this program happen. And then we have the classic, we have to do a one-on-one, we have to evaluate the students, we have to have guidelines and rules, but that comes second, right? Or that's a second part of our roles as staff. So I just wanted, I don't know if that resonates because I haven't been with you guys for all the conversation that's been happening before about discipleship and concern that we have for the DTS. I just wanted to bring us back to this foundation that at the base, we're just a bunch of believers coming together to try to become like Christ. And then we're doing it in this kind of structure that's a DTS. So you can and should be able to disciple people without having the structure of the DTS. And you can't have the structure of the DTS without the discipleship aspect, because then you'll just miss out so much. Does that make sense? I have not read the chat. I'm going to just keep up on this. Any questions or comment? Hopefully this will be more of a conversation than me telling you guys different things.
Just for the record, Betty Ann,
Yeah.
I've downloaded that file, So when
Yeah.
I send out the link later, I'll attach that in case people haven't been able to open it. I know there was a little discussion about can't see it, can't find it. So
Yeah.
we'll make sure we'll get it sent to you as well.
And this was not a formal DTS document. That's why it's a little harder to find, but it's just thoughts from Marine being in the environment for so long and having to answer the question, what's the role of a DTS staff? So I listed a bunch of questions in the emails before that we could talk about, but this will only be fruitful if we have a conversation going. So what is discipleship? I don't want us to spend lots of time on this. You can be philosophical about it. We're just going to go with the definition that discipleship is you are becoming like Jesus and you're helping others to become like Jesus, if that's okay with you guys. So we're going to jump in. I don't know if you have the email close that had the link for this meeting, but you had a few questions there. What does discipleship look like in your context, and what should it look like? So I wanted us to have this reflection of, yes, this is what it looks like, but what would I want it to look like? Right? Because that just like, we need to have an improvement on it. And how do we get there? So where do we need to help to accomplish that? So I don't know, some of us could be more people, less tasks. What do we need to accomplish that discipleship that we would want to see around us? What is the role of YWAM community in this? And where do you see strength and weakness in your approach? And how can we support each other? So that's my goal at the end, is that how can we help each other do this better? So if our mission is to do DTS, and DTS is the foundation of YWAM, there's a big responsibility if it's the first step, the first introduction to our people. So how do we help each other be good at this? So am I the host now? Okay, I'm looking at the number of people. Does somebody have right now, does not need to like process this a lot, to explain to us what does discipleship look like in the context that you're in, and what would you like it to look like, or what should it look like? I'm thinking right now, if one or two could share with all of us, maybe we can make small groups and you guys can talk about it a little more in a break room. Oh,
something just that we wanted to bring up is a lot of our experience within YWAM. We've been in locations where we had staff, we had students living in one location. So we're pretty centralized in community, and where we did our lectures, where we had corporate worship, corporate intercession. And one of the biggest challenges that we've had, and we've embraced it fully and we love it here, is just that our team is broken up into different houses around Nanaimo. And so we do have probably multiple team members living in this household, and then we have the rest of our team members, married couples. We all have different spaces just kind of around the city. But when we run a DTS, we have like a DTS house. And I guess one of the biggest challenges for us is we know the significance and the importance of a live, learn environment. And we have another DTS that's coming up, and it's a 20-minute drive from here. And so we're able to lift a student cap before we had to cap our DTS because of the housing, like the room size and what we're able to house with staff and students together. But I guess the challenge that we have right now is how do we create that live, learn environment when we have to drive to where the students are. And so our need and our desire is to have staff that live there. But the issue is that we all have leases, and so we'd be paying for our spaces too. So I guess just I think for us, we've lived in this setting, in this context for 3 years, and we've been able to make it work. But I think this next step for us is going to be challenging because it's a little bit different for us. Whereas we won't have staff living at that location except for maybe one person. And so it'd be great to hear from maybe some other locations that have housed students within their homes, and maybe have had to make that trek. What kind of things? I guess we would. I don't know. We probably know the answer, but it'd be good to hear like your processes, each different location, what you've done to be intentional in creating that live learn environment when you have students and staff that live in separate locations.
And can I ask you a second question before we answer or jump
Yeah.
into this conversation? What would you like it to be? Because it's not going to be like it was with everybody together. What would you like it to be in this new context?
Well, I think it's definitely essential for there to be staff with students. And so we would like to have a small community, at least a pocket of staff with
them,
with students, which is important for creating culture. It's important for accountability. It's important to kind of be that image and that model that we're wanting to champion the students to be following Jesus. And so we had that. We were very blessed. We had John Wayson's son, Tim.
Yeah.
After our last DTS, and he was that present person at our house, and he helped to create a lot of really sweet rhythms with our DTS. And honestly, he had the best temperament for being surrounded with students by himself all the time, because he had all these questions he was able to answer. And I was like, Tim, you're going to have a lot of questions, especially about schedules, about all these different things. You're the only staff there. And I don't think anyone else would have been able to do it. And so for me, I'm like, we've got to have 2 or 3 people, because there's not going to be another Tim for this next DTS.
That's good. That's good. Thank you, Levi. So anybody has that dynamic that they could speaking into this or give a few advice, a few how-tos?
I could speak to that a little bit. Yeah, that's really tough. I know the first few years of DTS here in Canada, we were in one giant building, and community was easy. And then we moved to Black Falls, Alberta, and we were spread over several houses, and it was really challenging. And I think the DTS took a hit because of that. Maybe one of the things that we did that helped is that every supper was in one of the different houses. So lunches, we were all together, and every supper, Monday to Friday, a different staff family would host it. So it was a very family feeling. So all the DTS students and a couple of the single staff would come to our house like Tuesday night. So it was a bit of chaos. It'd be like 35 people for supper in our house, but we did that. Every family would host one night. And I think that was probably one of the best things we did. But the community certainly took a hit, and it was different. And so don't have much more advice, but that was one of the things that we did.
Good. Thank you, Adam. It's similar here in Vancouver, but I'm kind of waiting to see people. I guess I'll jump in. So we here, if you guys have never been, we have a DTS house where students live, and then most of the staff live sporadically in the kind of close enough 10-20 minute drive from the house. So it's been different. DTS have looked different, but I would say the big thing is spending the time, being present, and like just dropping by, being around, because we should know, or I at least think that most discipleship conversation happens around doing the dishes. When you're bored, you're living in the living room and everybody's finally putting their phone down. when you're just like, you had a big day or a small, like whatever happened, is when you're just sitting there doing nothing. That's when you usually have more of the discipleship and conversation and things they really want to know. So I find that if I'm present, if I'm there, then I get a glimpse of those conversation, and there's this balance, and I think we've been talking about this too with eldership. There's a balance of, they don't know what they need yet. They don't know that they need your voice. They don't know that they need your opinion about things. They only know when like they see the difference in the conversation and the depth of the topic. So like when our young staff don't have the maturity to, or like they're pointing to Jesus is maybe not the depth that the student is looking for. I think there's a richness of like people that have experience and better ways to explain God and how to walk it out. But you need to be present, and like, well, and they don't know that they need it, if that makes sense. Because I always think like, I don't want to hang out with them. I haven't been cool for 15 years now, so I don't know why they would like want to hang out and have the conversation. But they actually really do, and they have so many questions when I go and sit there. But it needs time. Like, you need to build trust and relationship, and them to ask. And I think it's really needed. And I also think that of even older than me, like another generation, like they want to ask, but they don't know how, and they don't even know how to relate and have conversation. If you haven't been around DTS in a while, it seems to be an ability that we lost, of how to something like making friends, and just this ability to relate in community, like even having dinner together, and just simple common, that used to be common sense, is not so common anymore. So I think there's an aspect of us showing up and just being there, even if it takes a few times of showing up and being the awkward old person in the room. But it's important. But that presence, I don't know how you do it with family. So I'm looking at you guys in the NIMO, like, I'm not sure how you do it because it means that I have to like rush there, and I'm at home at 7:30 at night or 8, or like, just running around everywhere. So I don't know how you do it with kids, but there's a way to be present, I'm sure. So that's big. And also, I think our students are not as some of my students have been more mature and more knowledgeable of God than some of my staff. So this could just be my judgment and choosing my team and who God sends my way. But so there's also this thing that sometimes students are the right people to create culture in the house. And they will like get up in the morning and decide together that they want to get up at 6 to read their Bible and do those things. So there is a responsibility sometimes when there's less staff in the house, that they create the culture. That's not necessarily bad. It could be a really good culture. It used to be a belief that I had that you absolutely need a staff in the house. Experience has taught me that that's not always the best scenario.
If I could jump in, Betty Ann, I think this is an absolutely critical piece of discipleship. And I've been in all sorts of strange situations as a speaker coming in. And I won't tell you about any of them unless you take me out for coffee. But I've got dozens of weird things that have happened in YWAM settings. But this key thing about conversation, and I think you're absolutely right that people don't know how to even engage that. So just hanging out may not even do it. You almost have to be more intentional about it. And it's back to what Levi was saying when he was talking about Tim being the kind of the perfect person in that setting. He could somehow manage conversations and draw people out. And it is about conversation. And you're right. I think this is almost a lost art. So whatever you can do to facilitate conversations. And not just in the classroom, because you do it in the classroom and there's a big disconnect between classroom and home. I remember being in a DTS once, I'll just tell you one story. And in the classroom, everybody was good old YWAMers, holy, spiritual, everything like that. And I was with them in their house, just the only staff person in the house. And it was like I was invisible, and it was night and day between behavior. They were the most ungodly bunch of young people I've been around, and they just didn't care that they were just sort of hanging out like that. But you go to the classroom, and all of a sudden they'd be quite saintly. So you just, it's context all the time. It's not just classroom conversation. It's breakfast conversation. It's lunch conversation. It's late at night conversation. I think it's so critical. I'll get off my rant.
That was a good rant. There's also I love. Oh,
Sorry, I just wanted to, I kind of wanted to clarify a little more too, like when I talked about the right temperament with the students. They're definitely, like I believe that we should, for us at least, we should have staff living around the students, with the students. But I don't believe that all of our staff are the right people to live with them. And that's because sometimes there could be a sense of like, oh, I've got a policeman living in our house. It's this rule giver that's gonna bust me every time I'm too loud, or I'm burning something that I shouldn't be burning, or I'm going out and buying a BB gun that I shouldn't be buying. I want to smuggle it on outreach. These are all things that have happened, you know. And so it's understanding like the right people that you want to have in these settings, and talking with the staff. Like, I don't want you to just come down on the students, especially if you're the only person with them. Just hang out with them, be friends with them, but at the same time, encourage them, exhort them, pray with them. And the biggest thing is, you know, what we try to encourage the staff to do is get the students to rely on the Holy Spirit, and then trust them with what they hear from God. Let them go for it. But there are definitely some staff that, you know, they can be in different settings, they're great. But in maybe a setting where they're surrounded by 18, 19-year-olds, and they're wanting to stay up till 2 a.m, they're not the best staff. Like, sometimes things escalate. Sometimes things are said that come out like in corporate worship the next morning, where we're like, what happened last night? You said what to who? And I'm like, I know, I'm so sorry. I was so tired. You know, threw a shoe at their door, told them to shut up. And I'm like, dude, this is not Christ. Like, look, if it's too difficult living with the students, then like, we'll have you move out. Is that something, you know, that it's something that they want, because it becomes a chore for those staff in those settings. And so that's what I mean when I talk about having the right staff and the right temperament that can be super chill, just like water off a duck's back in these situations where it's like, look, you've got young people, they're going to be crazy and wild and reckless. And that's what we need. We need crazy, wild, reckless young people. And we need to be championing them and getting them to rely on the Holy Spirit and stepping out in these crazy things that they hear from God.
Yeah.
And you don't have that many people that are kind of geared for that. And so that's what I mean by, like, I want to pray for like a crazy group of staff that are ready to do that. Yes. And sometimes I've got to come into these situations and learn to relax a little bit. Like, okay, they bought a BB gun, but they're pretty responsible with it. I'm not going to come down hard on them. And I'm like, did you at least like talk with your family about, like, you got a gun? Yeah, they're fine. I'm going to ship it back home. Okay. All right, sweet, bro. Well, just don't shoot anybody with it.
Or at least in the face. That would be my rule. But first, you need to love young people, right? If you don't love young people, that's a big, thank you, Levy. That's good. Graham?
So I just want to tag on that. That's goes along with, we've had a lot of discussions lately about our history in schools. My wife and I have talked quite extensively about where we want to go and what we want to do with YWAM Kelowna. And it can be really easy for us to just, when you're a small base, to just take on any student that comes. And there's a subconscious idea that you're going to save everybody, and there's a bit of a messianic complex. I mean, I'm being a little silly, but I think to Levi's point, I remember being in Costco one day, and I was so frustrated with my kids, and they were just being crazy. And I saw my buddy there, and he's like, "Oh, that's because you haven't adapted yet." And I said, "What are you even talking about?" He's like, "Well, which one of the C's are you on with that kid?" And I'm like, "What are you even talking about?" And he said, "Listen, there's 4 C's in parenting. There's this caregiver stage, the coach stage, the cop stage, the caregiver stage, and the consultant stage. And you haven't transitioned into the coach stage." He said, "You still think you need to be a cop." And I realized,
That's good.
like he said, a lot of kids, they'll go through these stages and they transition before the parents do. And so our kids were transitioning in the different stages, and I just wasn't keeping up, and I didn't realize I was in coach stage, and I was trying to be a cop, and they were resenting it, and what they needed was questions like, "How's that working out for you to buy a BB gun? What do you think's going to happen if you bring a BB gun to YWAM?" That's a great question to ask somebody, rather than. And so we began to talk a little bit about where we're at. Like with my own kids, I'm in a consultant phase, which is after they get 21, we say, "Look, if you want any advice, you have to ask for it. We're not going to give you unsolicited advice anymore." But before that, they were in the coach phase. And I think that's where DTS fits in the best, is where we're kind of in a coaching kind of phase. If we're recruiting people that need cops, we're recruiting the wrong people. And one of our students was just talking about this when they took their YWAM in Australia. Her parents were cops and caregivers. They would default back and forth all the time. And then when she arrived suddenly in an adult environment where she needed to be coached, she didn't know what to do because she had no rules, and she had no caregiving. Nobody was taking care of her needs, and yet at the same time she was looking for all the rules. And I think we're going to receive people on the latter end of their cop phase, where they need people to, like, "Hey, there's a couple of rules here that are, deal breakers, but the rest of it, we're going to ask you really good questions and try to figure out where you're at. And like, we're going to coach you into thinking like an adult." And then by the time they're done, hopefully we get to the point where they only need a consultant, where they phone you and say, "Hey, Betty Ann, can you come marry me? Can you come talk about my marriage with me?" Those are the kinds of people we want to transition people into. We want to move them from cop to consultant, but through the coaching phase. I thought that was really helpful, and we've decided we're no longer going to look to recruit people that need cops. Just a FYI.
Yeah, it's good. YWAM is not for, yes. There's an awesome program team called Teen Challenge that do really good at cop work.
Can this Graham tag team with that, Graham? One of the best mentor coaches that I had was when I was in a chaplaincy program, and he never told me what to do. He actually led feeding questions that helped me come up with my own decision making, and it was probably the most profound experience I'd ever had. I was probably in my mid-20s or something or other at the time, and even though I had some life experience, I had career and all that sort of thing, for him to take me from that place of sort of being shown what to do to the place of being able to think through my choices and come up with my own decision making was probably one of the most critical tools that I learned and acquired.
That's good. I'm left with one question though, because I look around this meeting and I'm like, yes, we can all offer that. How do we teach our young staff to do the same? So that's kind of my, like, as you're sharing this, I'm like, yeah, this is good. But the people spending more time with my students, not sure they have those ability yet. They're getting them. So I think we can't, how are we discipling the discipler? One conversation, and I would like to, I don't know, story, if close, it's a little close from home because I'm doing the DTS, so you guys will meet them. So hopefully I won't say their names. I had a staff that came down from, I wasn't at the mountain one day, and he came down and he was like, you met so much. It was such a good day. And I was like, oh, cool. What happened? So much discipleship. Okay. What happened? So he tells me this story. One student forgot his gloves. And then everybody was like, I have a spare gloves. You want them? And he was like, no, I don't want it. I don't want any. So he ended up not skiing. Whoever forgot his gloves ended up not skiing that day. And I was like, what? How is this discipleship? And he was like, it was just good. Like, it highlighted this big issue like that he had, like everybody knows. And I was like, what are you talking about? He's just, well, everybody knows that he has this pride thing, or he doesn't want to borrow somebody else's glove. And then I was like, well, where? Okay. To me, that just sounds like you just highlighted somebody's, I don't know, sin or failure, or call it whatever. It just sounds humiliating. Where was the discipleship? And he was, oh, it was so good. He had to be there. And then, of course, I'm asking my question in the group. And then another students rise up the question of, where was the discipleship? And kind of everybody was having this conversation of, in this situation, where did we point people to Jesus? Or we just highlighted that this poor young guy forgot his glove and he has issues with borrowing things and asking for help, or I don't know what the issue is with this young man. But then, like, everybody, so this was exposed, but where was the pointing to Jesus? So I'm still left with, and then, like, it wasn't all successful conversation. Not all my discipleship conversation ends up being great. But we were just talking about it, be like, well, how could you have pointed to Jesus? What was the response? How could we have responded to it? How is this a discipleship situation? But it was really interesting to see that my staff was convinced that this was a great day, great discipleship. And then while asking questions, I was like, well, where did we become more like Christ in this? Where was Christ like in, like, we're going to ask you all the questions while you're not like taking somebody else's glove and then hang out, not skiing that day. I don't know. I don't know the situation, but I like the question of, how was the conversation a discipleship conversation? Are we just exposing each other? Or are we actually our brother's keepers? Are we caring for each other's soul of, like, becoming more like Christ, or just pointing each other's fault? I don't know if that raises anything, any feedback from this. You can also correct my thing, be like, you should have said this. I welcome it. I like the big group than the breakout room. I don't want to put us in little rooms. So I don't want to do my first plan. So what if I ask you guys, talking about relationship, discipleship, what would you say would be some of your strength or some of your weaknesses? Because the reason I'm asking is, how can we help each other do this? How can we help each other becoming better disciples and better disciplers? John, are you gonna say something? Just saw your hands.
Okay.
I don't know if your sound is
Hi,
gonna be good.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, everyone. I am John. I'm here in YWAM Global Gateway, and I'm from Samoa. And I just want to share my experience about what the story that you told, Betty Ann. You know, as our last DTS, every time we have this time of sporting, sport. We play basketball or play football, and I play with the student. And I'm from country that always play in competition and play competitive against each other and play who will become the first place and those things. So I play with the students and we always have argument and we talk trash about each other. And so after when like finish playing, I go to my room and ask myself if I help the student grow in like disciple them good, or I just look down on them. And and the question that I always ask, if I show them like I have Christ in me and disciple them, like because they came to the DTS, they need help and they need our advice, and they need to hear from us in our experience because we did our TTS before them and all those things. And I always ask that question to myself, and sometimes I have hard time to try to like work with students because when we come to sport, I always be competitive and I don't want to lose, and
Yes.
that's how Samoan people are. But I find it's hard for me, but have to lay down that like my expectation, but lay down my pride and try to to help those young people to grow and know how to their walk with God, and also like help myself to learn and grow in my own walk, so that the young people see me and they can see Christ in me, and so try to help them. And
That's good, John. This
I
is a
think
question
for
for you.
myself, it was my first time staffing a DTS last summer.
Yep.
And so I went into it with very different expectations from my own DTS. I really like what Graham shared, and also the couple from Nanaimo about how to like trust the students and where they're at in their journey. And for my DTS, when I did my DTS, it was very much student-led. When I think of all the amazing God moments that we had at a school, it was student-led. Like we'd just go up spontaneously to do intercession over the entire base. We would do deliverance on each other, like in our bedrooms at night. If we were doing some spiritual work, if something came up, like we were just there. And all of our staff were under the age of 26. So there was other staff like that were not DTS staff that lived outside of the campus, but everybody on campus was under 26. So our staff were still learning. They were like at the same place. Oh, it's really behind. Can you hear?
We can. It's dragging, so we can hear a little bit, but it takes lots of concentration. We don't hear well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I love what you guys shared. Love that John. First, he's gone. John is gone, but
Yeah, there's a
that
time
sounds like a different young man than when I met him a few years ago. So, but I love what he shared, and the challenge I would give him. So maybe you guys, if you can hear this, you can tell John that I've challenged him. Is then when you come back, when you come back after and have this reflection, was I pointing people out to Jesus? If the answer is no, are we going back to address it? So like, yes, that's our role, but like when we are in competition and when we do win and when we like, you crush somebody on the way, am I going back to be like, yeah, that was not okay. I'm sorry. I'm supposed to point you to Jesus and I didn't do that well. So I think we do that as much as we can, but then, I fail. I say the wrong things every day a few times. Are we going back and correcting our behavior too? So John, I hope you heard my challenge to you, but you're doing great. You're becoming an amazing young man. That guy. If this wouldn't be recorded, I would say it's because they had such a good staff training. Thank you for Steph for thinking I'm funny. Graham, you had a few inputs. You can jump in.
That Graham.
You.
Oh, I said it in the thing. I don't know. I don't want to speak all the time. I could speak for hours. I've done so many schools. I literally I can feel it. And one of the things I think that's really hard is, I think Betty Ann, you're hitting on it really well. And that is that when we get young leaders who are in our environment, how do we encourage them to relax a little bit and become more like Jesus and more coach orientated? And I think that is really the question of the day, because it's one thing to say, well, I'm leading, I know what it's going to feel like, I know what I want it to be like, and Levi hit on this a little bit too, and so yeah, I mean, I have lots and lots of things to say. I just don't want to take up all the airwaves.
What would you say? So you've been doing this for years.
Yeah.
Years and years, the more I look at you, like a really long time. So what would you say is kind of your, I was going to say, not to put you on the spot, but to use you as an example, a discipleship conversation, what would you say is a weakness of yours in equipping your young people, in being with people? How would you say, like, an area where we as a community can pray for you, help you? Like what's the thing? And my purpose in asking is not just to put you on the spot, is to how can we help each other? And then, like, we do this mistake. We just had this conversation yesterday of, you have youth with a mission and they're young and they're doing great, but then you're not a young person anymore, but you still need discipleship and equipping, but you're just in this middle place, like 30s and 40s, but you're not like an elder yet. You're still there. You still need disciple. You still need help. But we're equipping young people. But there seems to be this, this zone. I don't know if other people are feeling it. This kind of weird place where you're the leader, but you still have lots to learn. So, like, what are the areas that you'd say, as you've done this for years and years and years and years?
The gray hair. Thank you for the question. I appreciate that. I was hoping we would get to weaknesses for sure, because it tends to be something we might own it personally, but to talk about it openly is an opportunity for me. So thank you. I think my default is that if I'm not careful, because I'm such a passionate person, and even in this conversation, I feel quite challenged in this, is to not take over and not to just do it, but to leave tension and opportunity for people to fail. So when we're carrying this thing so close to our chest, building something, planting something, teaching something, it can be really hard sometimes for me as a type A personality to let the pauses create enough tension. I thought when we were in your class this last week, we did a lot of that. We created a lot of pausing and a lot of tension, and letting students answer and letting students be heard, and then if they don't talk, to pull them out and volunteer them. And so if I'm not careful in my passion, I tend to just run things and do it all. And so I have to be pretty intentional about about not doing everything and creating space for opportunity for people to fail.
Mm.
And I think one thing that Danny Silk taught us a little while ago, like quite a while ago, was this value for the chaos and the failure to be a great teacher and an opportunity to really ask good questions, because without it, sometimes we don't see the mistakes. We actually don't see the opportunity. We see them. In the past, I would have thought of failure as being inefficient. But in the name of efficiency, I can often relegate out all the opportunity for discipleship. And so
You're
that
robbing them of becoming like
them.
Christ.
Right. And I think it's beautiful when you see Jesus deal with the sons of thunder. I think it's beautiful when you see him deal with Peter. I mean, my goodness, I relate to Peter so much. And, he's quick to call Peter out, and he's quick to call the sons of thunder out. And it's not hard for Jesus to let the failure happen and put Judas in charge of the money. And just the layers and layers of, I heard one teacher once say, you're ready for the next level of leadership when you have space on your team for a Judas. And I'm not sure if I'm there yet, but certainly I relish the opportunity to be able to have a known person come into our midst that may not fit our categories, but to give them opportunity just a little bit bigger than they're capable of. I know people are willing and capable, and I have two different ways I have a metric for how I measure people's engagement, and it's willingness, it's attitude and ability. And sometimes we have to put people in positions where their ability isn't quite ready yet, so that they can grow into it. And sometimes we have to put people into an opportunity where their attitude isn't quite ready yet, so they can grow into that too. And instead of just doing it ourselves. So that's for me. I mean, I don't want to take up too much of your way, but
That's good. I think a lot, I was going to say a lot, most of us, but maybe hopefully not, but we have that tendency of doing it ourselves instead of, it's easier, it's more efficient. But how are we in the long run? If we're supposed to, in the business of discipleship, that's our command. How are we bringing people also to become like Christ, not just us? So just relating back to Levi's conversation, I wanted staff in the house that are capable of being in the house, not just following the rules, but are engaging in conversation that are gospel conversation, to have gospel conversation. So how are we equipping people around us to have those type of conversations? And it can't be doing it all ourselves, because then but it's messy. It's messy. We had a situation last week, and I thought Graham had the front seat of it, where I've talked to a staff about, I thought I was offering gently a correction to one of my staff, and he so I could have done it that better in another situation and explained more and different things, but his response was to turn around and correct all the students in front of our guest speakers that were there. There wasn't a success at all. It created way more conversation for me that I don't even know how to approach, because I'm just like, did I communicate this? That my point was, well, this is direct for those that don't know me, but my point was, you're wrong, you need to change this. And he understood everybody else is wrong. I need to make sure that they all do it better. And it's Betty Ann's correction. I'm being the messenger. So then but that's what it is. That's what it is. So if I'm not willing to have the conversation again, I'm not willing today, actually. It might take me a few days to have the conversation. But but like it's allowing young people to try it. But if I want them, if the goal is for them to lead like Jesus, then I need to give them a chance to do it, even if it looks super messy and the students are kind of like offended, and the students are going to him and be like, what are you doing to us? That's not okay. But all this mess, I wouldn't have had to deal with it if I would have just been there and be like, done the job myself. But what's the point of that, other than looking way better in front of Graham and Chris? Go ahead, Dan.
Thanks so much for having me again. It's really awesome to hear everyone's thoughts. One of the things I was just thinking about, I know for some of the staff that we've coached here, even myself when I first entered into YWAM, I think sometimes there can be this sense of we take our students' mistakes personally, and as if though it's like a mark somehow on how we're discipling people or so on and so forth. And what I've noticed is I think that can often lead to even like a greater, I guess, legalism, and therefore even more shame and condemnation. And so, you know, one of the things too that I've found has been helpful, and I was just thinking even Live, with what you were sharing with having, you know, a few staff people in the house with the students, is what I've noticed is, you know, when we have staff that for whatever reason, they might feel a little bit insecure, they'll take someone's failure, someone's mistake as a personal knock on if they were good staff or not. It can lead to like a really heavy focus on rules. And I mean, I think rules are helpful, especially when students first come. They're dependent in a sense. I mean, if you think about how community develops, we start off being a little bit dependent. We're in a new surrounding. We need information. We need some rules. We need some guidelines. But the idea is that would move to like independence, where people can kind of shake the tree a little bit to see if they understand things. And sometimes that creates mistakes and an environment for that. But, you know, as we deal with those things, we move kind of to this interdependent phase, I'd say. But I find like the legalism can be a bit of a trick, right? And so, so one thing I would say too is just having conversation with our staff too. One thing Darlene would often say, which I always appreciated, was to have as few rules as necessary, as few rules as possible, but as many as necessary. And so just this context of saying, well, even if we have rules, or just to constantly reevaluate the rules that you have as a DTS or as a YM location, you know, from time to time. I know we, as a leadership team here in Dunham, but 2 years ago, we were like, we should just revisit the rules and things we have at YM Dunham. And we realized that a lot of times rules get put in place for specific seasons, or even because of specific context of people, which is great and normal and fine, but it doesn't mean that they need to be set in stone forevermore. And we realized that, you know, even some of our rules that we had at YM Dunham, there was like, I don't know, a page or two that you could just get rid of. They just weren't necessary anymore. It was kind of creating more confusion, more heaviness on people. And so, you know, I think as well, going through that process, some of the things we went through with our staff too, is we kind of said that, okay, like we have this rule, what value do you think that rule actually points to? You know, what is the one another value kind of behind that rule that we were wanting to teach and model? And so having our staff even kind of go through that process with us and thinking implicationally in that matter was really helpful, because I think what we were able to do is say, okay, well, if that's the value, is this rule necessary, or are there other ways that we can convey that message, or that we can kind of teach that thing? And so I think that was helpful too, but also when it came time to perhaps enforce a rule, if ever, I think of some of our staff who might be in student housing, helping them out. It wasn't just enforcing a rule for the sake of enforcing it, but also that teachable moment of saying, like, do you understand why we ask this? Or do you understand what the purpose is behind this rule or this thing? So, and kind of leading students along those types of discussions. And so I think that's been something that's been a takeaway from me, at least over the last years, either personally or even as we've been kind of helping our staff or staff elsewhere deal with, you know, conflicts or some challenging situations and things like that as well. So just how do we help staff learn implicational thinking? And so I think that's really, again, always saying, okay, like it's no problem to have a rule, but what's the purpose of that rule? What's the value that that's supposed to represent? And just being willing to adapt and change them from season to season too. So anyway, just a few thoughts. I don't know if that's helpful or if anyone agrees or disagrees, but yeah.
I agree. I think that's a great conversation to have actually with my team of student failures doesn't reflect you or their, yeah, I like it. Thanks, Dan.
Yeah, Dan, I really like that. We did something very similar to that in Alberta, got rid of almost all our rules. And what we did, we didn't call them rules. I can't remember what we did, but we said, what are some things we want to see as a community? Like, so we said, as a community of believers in the next season, like for this next school, what is it what we want to see? So if people talked about like healthy patterns, like even just physical stuff like sleeping and eating well, we'd say, well, how can we help each other with that? You know, what are some things as a community that we can agree on? And so we would kind of create new rules for every school, but it would come out of what the community was trying to do. And sometimes, yeah, everyone would say, well, let's do this together. Let's not do that together. They would voluntarily choose, not to be on phones or not to be on the internet. And then even for us as the school leaders, sometimes we'd be willing to shift some other things. Like it's not rule related, but we noticed that nobody wanted to get up and eat breakfast at 7 o'clock. So we said, but then everyone would be grumpy and tired during class. So we said, well, what if we're willing to just cancel breakfast and have a lot more food out at mid-morning coffee break. And I'll tell you, did that ever make a difference in the school? Just for us to be willing to do some of that. It made them better learners too, by giving them the protein and healthy food at 10:30 in the morning. So anyway, I like that direction. Good stuff, Dan.
That's good. That's good.
I like that too, because I think as much as we want these students to stay and be staff and they're going to be here forever, the reality is that most are not. And so I think equipping them well to be thoughtful and mindful of the people around them, and even creating spaces. Like, I know it's challenging to have like staff in different locations and stuff, but I do think there is some benefit in learning how to be a good community member in the city or town that you're in, and creating community in that. So like going from house to house and having dinner together, or like coming up with things in the house that help everybody live better and treat each other better, and that they would be influencers outside of their YWAM setting too. Because I think going from DTS into regular life is hard, but equipping students with some of those tools I think is really helpful, if they don't stay on staff forever.
I think to tag on to that too, like when people are understanding, when students are understanding a value, or when conversations are brought down to the value level, I think it allows them to adapt what they've learned into whatever context they go to afterwards, hopefully, so if they're understanding that it's important to be open and honest and transparent, because it's either for their safety or for the safety of others, or even just to build a sense of community, then they're not dependent on a rule, hopefully, to do it, but they can actually creatively think through, well, how can I, what would this look like when I go home, or what would this look like in whatever season or context I find myself in later? So they're less dependent on a rule or a law, but rather able to kind of think through how to adapt those things to different circumstances.
I learned that those need to be communicated well. Because here, this mentality, no rules don't disciple people, people disciple people. But slowly, when you had young, inexperienced people, there was those like rules that were not there. It's no rules, but you have to be there at 11. Or there's no rules, but if you don't show up to this, you'll get talked to. Or there's no rules, but this. So I learned that the expectations or the guideline or the no rule or whatever the approach needs to be communicated well to at least our staff team, or I needed to improve in that, because then because the no rule made them so unsafe. Like, well, how do we know what's the boundary? How do we know, which is what we're trying to break? But so there was a communication needed to improve in how we were doing that, because I discovered that we had a mentality, us out here, but in the house, then there was all those rules or expectation that became cop central. So just as a heads up, so you don't have to repeat the same mistakes I did. Destiny, when you shared, we heard like some aspect of it. I don't know if you want to try again, if the sound is better. We heard that you were sharing that on your DTS, it was more like student-led interaction with God. So we had that, but then I don't know how much you shared after, if you did share something, or if your thought was communicated or not.
Yeah, I think what was happening with our computer is it was lagging like a minute, because then you said thank you, John, halfway through what I was saying. I was like, I better just stop here.
Okay.
But right now, are we on?
You're good now.
Yeah, so I was basically just sharing about the difference between my DTS, like the one I was a student in, and the one that I staffed last year, and how my expectations were really off, like going into it, because yeah, my DTS was very young, like all of our DTS staff were very young, and it was very much student led when I think about all the outside of class activities. And like we weren't all like super mature in our faith, but we really took initiative, and we're like really encouraged in the Lord, and then we're able to encourage each other. But going into our DTS last year, I had a lot of like inner struggle. Part of the reason was my younger brother was in it. So I know my younger brother very well. And there was a lot of issues in our DTS with computers and technology, and where the students were always on their technology, like all the time in class playing video games. And we tried to, like, going into it, make it like this relationship of trust. Like, okay, we're going to, as staff, or at least the younger staff, we understood the base leaders had to have their phones on them, but we're going to put our phones in the phone prison and like try and encourage encourage the students to do the same. And it wasn't happening. So we had a lot of like rebellion, and just like students not recognizing what is good for them, and not like respecting our efforts to try to encourage them. So I'm like really learning a lot this morning about like the whole process of like, okay, assessing where are your students at, what do they need. And for our students last year, except for our girl student, who's Muriel, she's here with us this morning, there was a lot
she was perfect. It was all the other ones.
Sure. A coughing going on. So it's just like, okay, maybe our students that our guy students were not prepared for the kind of responsibility that we were like putting on them. And how do we balance that? Like, rules are important, but they're not the most important thing. But how do we encourage rebellious students who don't recognize what's healthy for them to like break out of those cycles so that they can receive into their life? So I don't know if it's more of a question or just an observation, but yeah.
That's a good observation.
Yeah. That's a big one. I have a few. Graham, yeah, of course you have something. You did the little. I think my first thought would be, I'll let you speak after. If I have the control. It sounded so like I might give you the right to speak. The one key thing I think is the motivation, like emotions. So those are really important conversation to have at the beginning. Like, why are you here? What's your expectation? What do you want to do? What's the goal? Because it can be that their mom was just like, I don't know what you do to do with you anymore. I'm going to send you to a DTS, and that guy doesn't want to be there at all. So like that can be the scenario, but the majority, they want to get to know God. The majority is that they want to step into this relationship with God. The majority are serious. They just don't know how, and they're going to respond in a way that they've been like programmed to. And this is how they escape from everything. And this is how they connect to, that's so safe. So like, but the motivation is key to have this conversation early on, and it gives you kind of the tools, and it equips you to have the conversation with them. Hey, you say you want to learn about Jesus, but like you paid attention zero to whatever was happening in the morning, and I don't know, and that's an ability. And if you can find somebody in your group that has that gift. Some people, if you can get distracted and not think about your phone, that's huge. So if you have somebody on your team that's really a good entertainer, that's the I in the DIS test, that's really like just, and people will be like, what is happening? They'll get their eyes off their phone, get that person involved a little bit. But the motivation of why they're on DTS is really important. And the earliest you can have that conversation, the better. And the more they can like explain it. If it's more like, oh, I want to be more like God. Oh, yeah. Or I want to get to know God. Or I want to do a mission trip. Yeah, but if you can dig more, if you can get like, my grandfather was a really man of God. And when he passed away, people respected him and people loved him, and he loved his family. And everybody everywhere I go, they talk about my grandpa, like he was amazing. And then I realized that my life is going to, so I want to become like my grandfather, and my relationship with God is what's going to make me like him. If you can get that answer, it'll be really easier to be like, put your phone down. Yeah. Graham, you had something?
I was gonna say something similar, so now I feel a little shy because it was really she. Anyway, just I think Chris and I have come to terms with our role is to inspire, equip, and activate believers to live a purpose-driven life of faith. And it's all fine and dandy when you have ideals and idealisms all the time. As a visionary, I go, okay, that's what we want to do. But then when somebody fails, we immediately, every one of us comes to terms with what we really are fighting for, and what we're fighting to protect when somebody fails shows up when people fail. So when somebody makes a mistake, does something, even if it's unwritten rules, you can say you have no rules in your environment, but you have subconscious, like common sense stuff that you think is normal. Like we think about cultures, you have two different cultures combining. Maybe in their house, they didn't sit down for dinner. Maybe in our house, we did. And when they don't come to the table, we're like, what? We have a rule, you come to the table. And, there's this kind of like underlying subconscious set of agreements that we've made in life generally. Like you don't crosswalk when the light goes certain, we have the subconscious thing. And when people break our expectations and our rules, we suddenly realize that every one of us starts to fight for the rules. We start to fight for that instead of fighting for connection. And I think that it's great whether you have a ton of rules or you have no rules, there's always rules. And I kind of said this to Paul a little while ago. I think in the absence of hierarchies, unhealthy hierarchies show up. And it's the same thing with rules. And with the absence of rules, sometimes unhealthy expectations show up. And some people in our leadership team might have, well, of course you take the garbage out when it's this close to the top. Of course you do that. It's common sense. And then you start fighting with people because you're like trying to maintain a set of rules and expectations you have that you haven't clearly identified. So whether you identify them or don't identify them, there are these rules. The real question comes down to, I think, what you're saying, Betty Ann, which is not what's right and wrong, but what's beneficial. And I think if we're fighting to protect connection and we're fighting to inspire, equip, and activate, and we make that our mandate, if somebody breaks a rule, we have to ask ourselves, is this beneficial for their inspiration? It's that whole, I'm leading people with a carrot, not a stick. But sometimes it's more efficient with a stick. So you just beat people with a stick, subconsciously, of course.
I could do
Whoa. Anyway, yeah. And so I think we're just going to decide in our heart of hearts and really question each one of us, every leader. Like I make myself accountable to my own team. Like if you see me fighting to protect the rules, I'm like the Galatians, I'm living with the woman of slavery, not the woman of freedom. And
we've been having this conversation on and on, like what's right and wrong, like right and wrong, the right thing, the wrong thing. And we keep having this conversation, and it's not about right and wrong, it's about the Jesus way. What's the Jesus way? So it's not the good or bad, it's the Jesus way. Maybe good and bad doesn't fit as good, but I don't know. It's because we seem to have those, well, that's the right way to do it, and that's the wrong way, and you need to fit in this right way. But as Christians, shouldn't there be there's a Jesus way? I don't know if that explains things, but this is a conversation that we keep coming. What's the Jesus way? What's the third option? What's the Jesus way? Adam, did you have oh, sorry. Okay. I haven't met you yet. I'm excited to meet you.
Scratching my head.
Okay.
Forgot I wasn't muted.
Dulcie?
Yeah, sorry, could I just add something? The aspect of the no rules, I think it's not like that there's no rules. There is one ultimate rule, and it's to love God and love others. And so in that, how are you walking that out? How are you discipling someone that is a student, but also a staff member, yourself? I think that's the golden rule.
We have this series of command that God asks us. So we have all those things that we're supposed to follow. I don't know if you want to call it rule or however you want to call it, but we need to follow this. I don't know. Side note. John, you had a little something.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm also just recognizing we have about 10 minutes left, Betty Ann.
Yeah.
Okay,
keeping
and
an eye on it.
and this is for Graham and Kelowna. Picking up on that, you know, where I ran into this, one of the sort of clear examples is in Danny Silk's book, Culture of Honor. Is that right? Is it whether first chapter or near the beginning of the book where he relates an example of how he walked with two students, of course, Danny Silk at Bethel in Redding, California, for everybody else, and their program is a 1 year program as opposed, you know, it's a 9-month program or 8-month program as opposed to a 3-month, 5-month program, and second year, third year, sort of like a second level school and third level school. But he relates an example of how two students who had finished the first year and were coming back for a second year program over the summer were involved in a sexual relationship, and they came back and student was pregnant. He goes through the example of how he walks through that with them and with the rest of the student body and the staff and the greater community. And I won't go through that now, but it is, and Graham, unless you want to speak to that, but I would certainly recommend Culture of Honor, the book by Danny Silk, to us as a whole. It's just it captures this idea of really, Dulcie, what you're sharing in regards to to love God and to love others. His terminology is, how do we develop this culture of honor? And it's just another way of looking at it. But Danny has some great thoughts. I found it really inspiring. So anyway, I just wanted to share that. Thanks, Betty Ann.
No problem. Any last comment or question? I have a challenge for all of us, but if you guys have another input before I give this challenge, because then that's going to be, oh yeah, go for it, Destiny.
So yeah, I really like what Dulcie said about loving God and loving others, because I think that's what it really comes down to. Like we had one student that we had to send home because they were
that's always tough.
They were taking away from the rest of the students learning and growing, and they wanted.
It was not your, was it your brother? No. Okay, that could have been even more tough.
So they were taking away from everyone learning to love God and love others, and they were expecting everybody else to keep the rules but not keeping the rules themselves. So it was like, okay, there's some things that have to be set in place, because in order to love others well and to love God well, like if you don't have any honor in your heart towards other people, then it makes it really difficult. So I think that's a really good point. It just comes down to loving God and loving others through our actions, attitudes.
So simple. Here's my challenge to us. Hopefully I'll explain it well. But it's for me and for Graham, and then for everybody else who has the tendency to do everything yourself, because that's the best way to get it done right. But I like listening to all of this. My challenge is how today and the rest of this week specifically, because hopefully it's going to be on our mind, but today, how can we let somebody around us lead instead of us? Like kind of take over, so they get to be equipped. So Dulcie is leading the rest of the day, but how can we give this opportunities for others to become like Christ? How are we giving other people the place and to lead? So how, if I'm thinking about myself and my team, what occasion could I just take over and I'm going to be like, I'm going to let them fail? Or maybe, actually, I just spent a weekend on Vancouver Island, and my young staff, who's staffing for the first time, organized all of it. And it was a success, and it was great. And he did awesome. And he's thought of things that I didn't think about. And I'm repeating to him that I'm proud of him all the time. He's getting annoyed with me. He's like, you say this all the time. Come on. Like, and was I this, like the expectation was so low, come on, I can do a good job. But they might actually like, yeah, they will become leaders and they will become disciples. So just as homework or a challenge, or how can we become better at this, of not only us becoming like Christ, but inviting people into that. So what is something, I see you, John, what is something that we can let somebody else do for us today, or do instead of us today, so they get equipped to make disciples too? Go ahead, John. You had a little.
Okay, hello again. So about the challenge or the question that you asked, our YWAM here in Oliver, or the YWAM Global Gateway, our leadership, they sit down and discuss about how to give responsibility to each and everyone's staff here. So we make a, how you call, department? So have a person lead this department and person lead this. So then, but the heart of the leadership is to put the trust, or see how the young staff or older staff together are grow in their own responsibility in all those areas that they be responsible, like hospitality, the maintenance, like outside work duty and those stuff. So we all have those responsible, and so the leadership, we don't put a lot of pressure on them to lead everything, because they need to have their time to lead, just run insurance and run all those things. But we need like to work together as a team and try to come together and try to figure out stuff, and lead on your own department that the leader has given to you. So it's between you and God. If you do your work good, or you do your responsible as you do the thing and grow in that responsible that you've been given from the leadership and all those things. And that is a great thing that happening this year in our YOM Global Gateway. Is to work together as a team and try to come together and make things easier, and try to grow in that areas of responsible for everything. Yeah.
That's good. They're giving you a chance to become an amazing young man of God, my friend. I hear Eliani in the back. She's like, yeah, you better step up. No. No, that's good, John. That's really encouraging. That's good. Good job. All right. So thank you, Graham, for I thought you just send it to myself, and I just realized you send it to everybody. Thank you. That's kind and encouraging. I'll just pray for us. So Lord, I pray that we would see this, that we would pay attention, that as we are invited in your kingdom and we're invited to be in your family, that we invite others, and we do that well. That, Lord, as we disciple, we have programs to run, we have missions to run, and all this programming things where we have to do things. But above all, we're a community of believers that hopefully are becoming like you. And Lord, would you highlight things just today as we go on in our lives of responsibilities and things where we can have people join us, that we can share the load like John was explaining. How can we become leaders together and help each other to become better disciplers? And Lord, highlight those opportunities where we can take along, I want to say young people, but young in their faith, or young in their relationship with you, and take them alongside with us to just help them. I have this idea of this slingshot, like you bend down and poof, they go further. So this kind of picture of help us know when to help them go further. So yeah, at the end of the day, we just want to become like you and give you glory for all of it. So Lord, help us be with us. Help us connect with one another and help how do we do this together? Lord, I'm always amazed that somehow you picked me, you picked us to have this revelation, to get to know you and to walk with you. Thank you, Lord. Thank you. So I don't know, Paul, if you had other things, if we want to stop the recording.
Oh, I
or-
just thank you. I was just reflecting throughout this, how even with the Zoom, there was a conversation that starts churning. And I think that is such a critical part of the discipleship process, actually having conversations. And what that does is it takes things from up here and takes them into the heart level of that's where you grow. That's it isn't, you don't grow by adding stuff up here. You grow by acting on that.
Mm.
And sometimes it's a conversation that matters like this.
Mm.
Maybe one thing I would say, learn to ask good questions. And good questions are not questions of here's the right answer. It's not Jeopardy questions that you're asking for. What you want to do is you want people to engage. And sometimes you don't even know how to engage until you open your mouth and start talking. Because a lot of times you yourself often will communicate answers to yourself, but you don't do it unless you talk. If you keep it up here in your head, it just goes around and around in different circles. And I think this was an excellent time. I really appreciate you leading out on this, Betty Ann. Appreciate Graham jumping in, appreciate Leve jumping in, John jumping in. I mean, this is really good. Love the sense of learning here that was going on, even in this Zoom gathering. Dan, so glad that you're part of this as well, coming with us. So, anybody else have any sort of concluding comments? You want Betty Ann back? Do you want some more?
Yeah.
Do we need to create a circle for the DTS, just so you guys could be doing this? Let us know. We're willing to serve that. We can do all sorts of things with this.
I think that's a really good comment, Paul. Comment there. I think if we could hear back from folks, so it helps us to be able to steer the ship a little bit. Do we want to do this every month? In between our connect calls or whatever. But feed us that information along with, say, maybe questions, ideas that you might have to help us to be able to facilitate that would be great. You can send the email to me, and then I'll just forward it to John and Paul, and we can work on it, work on the details.
Yeah, just for everyone's clarity, this is forming a circle. It isn't. People do not have to be part of this. We have the monthly thing, so we've just started acting on that circle impulse. And if the DTS wants to spin off and becomes another, or I wouldn't say just DTS, discipleship as a lifestyle. If that's a circle, there's just some interesting things that happened just recently too with the member care. They're sort of creating another circle. These are really healthy growth things that are happening even during the pandemic. So we want to applaud and nurture and encourage this sort of thing to develop in our YWAM region. All right. Well, Betty Ann, thanks again. Great to see you in action. So this is the proverbial herding cats type issue, but it's so good that we could get together. So good to see everybody, and Graham will send out information for the first of the month, and if we get feedback on more of these, we can certainly host something else along the lines. So blessings to one and all.
Graham and